Welcome to the hidden gem in the middle of Southeast Asia. This is Lao, the land of a million elephants and the white parasol, where the people call themselves the children of the sticky rice, and the cuisine is a showcase of ancient techniques and the bounty of the Mekong River. There was a time when this was a thriving and powerful kingdom, but after 200 years of tragedy, disaster, and Vietnam War-era destruction, Lao today is almost forgotten. Home to barely 7 million people, with the vast majority scattered in remote, rural villages. But this is a place with a culinary culture like nowhere else, and one that's had an outsized influence on the food of the region. So today we're diving in, exploring the national capital and heading into the countryside to learn the story of the iconic dishes, to try the local favorites and understand the ingredients, and meet the chefs who are keeping alive the old traditions. And most of all, we're here because this is one of the best places to eat on the planet. To slow down, relax, have a few drinks, and turn ourselves over to the one-of-a-kind country of Lao. In 1859, after colonizing Saigon, the French began exploring inland from the Mekong Delta and set their sights on the land between today's Vietnam and Siam. The territory they claimed belonged to three separate kingdoms known as Luang Prabang, Vientiane, and the Champasak, but all three were linked by language and culture, and they were all ruled by an ethnic group called the Lao. So instead of differentiating between the three, the French simply gave them all the collective name the Laos, Laos. Now, of course, in French, the S is actually silent, but on maps, this would become the foreign name for the colony, and then, starting in 1953, the independent country of Lao, or Laos, bringing together states and settlements with a very long history along the banks of the Mekong River. To tell the story of Lao, well, it's not as much about the country as it is the people. And according to their mythology, it all begins in the 7th century AD, when the gods were unhappy with the Dai of Southeast Asia and wiped them out with a flood, leaving behind only 3 great chiefs and 1 buffalo to help till the land to grow rice. When the fields were planted, the buffalo died, and from its body grew a vine, from which a new human race would emerge. And when the people had grown and were ready to build a society, the king of the gods sent his own son, Khun Manichan, to bring rule and structure. Upon his death, he'd divide the land into 7 polities governed by his children, with the center being based in a city called Sua, now Luang Prabang. Now, the myth of Khun Manichan would become part of the canon of much of Southeast Asia, with King Wutong, the founder of Ayutthaya, and Jiang Hong, who unified Sichuan in China's Yunnan, among many who claim descent from his lineage. And in Lao, well, the modern story begins with another supposed ancestor, Phang, born into the royal family in Luang Prabang, then exiled to Angkor as a child after his father lost a struggle for power. Phang would marry the daughter of the great Khmer king Jayavarman II, and then in 1353 returned to his homeland backed by an army, conquer the 7 Lao kingdoms of Khun Manichan, and establish a new empire called the Lansang, or the Lansang Home Khao, the land of a million elephants and the white parasol. The Lansang would rule for more than 350 years, with Vientiane in the 17th century described by foreign visitors as the greatest city in Southeast Asia, a hub of culture and prosperity, but the golden age of Lao wouldn't last for long. By the 1780s, Siam, rebuilding after the fall of Ayutthaya, set out to take control of the Mekong Basin. A series of wars would lead to Lao becoming a forced vassal of the Siamese, and after Vientiane rebelled in 1826, Siam sent in the entire force of its army and burned the Lao capital to the ground, forcibly removing every single citizen and taking the majority into slavery in what's now Isaan, Thailand. The last remnants of the Lansang would scatter into the countryside, surviving in small villages and rural settlements, with Lao culture kept alive only in secret and abroad in Isaan. When the French arrived and colonized the region, they found Vientiane empty and overgrown, but given its strategic location and legendary past, they went to work rebuilding, declaring the city the new capital of Colonial Lao and moving thousands from Vietnam to fill in the empty buildings. As time went by and Vientiane grew, some of those Laotians from the countryside came back, then arriving in bigger numbers after Lao gained independence. And today, well, it's the cultural center of the land of a million elephants and the white parasol. Two years, no love. Ever since Daria and I began our annual tradition of spending a week every winter in Vientiane, more often than not, we end up at this restaurant, a place called Phakhao Lao, just a few steps inland from the Mekong River. We've been here enough that even if the dog still doesn't know who I am, the family does. As whenever we sit down, they bring over a few bottles of beer Lao, and they know all of our favorites, the dishes that keep us coming back. We'll do the
Tam mak hung.
the tam mak hung. We'll do the mok pa.
Say ua.
Which is three sai hua.
Three.
She wants one, just her. Phakhao Lao is run by a mother and daughter, Aoi, who's in charge of the business, and Waruni, a retired hairdresser who makes the food exactly how she used to cook for her kids when they were growing up in the family home. Now at age 65, helped out by a couple generations of cousins, nieces, and nephews.
อาหารลาวเป็นอาหารที่มีเสน่ห์เป็นอาหารที่ไม่เลี่ยนแบบมีรสชาติที่เป็นเอกลักษณ์แต่ละประเทศอาหารก็ไม่เหมือนกันอาหารไทยก็อร่อยอีกแบบหนึ่งอาหารเวียดนามก็อร่อยอีกแบบหนึ่งอาหารลาวก็มีรสชาติที่เป็นเอกลักษณ์ไม่เหมือนใครแล้วก็น่าสนใจอาหารลาวแบบนี้หาทานที่ไหนก็ไม่มีไปอยู่ที่ไหนก็คิดถึงมันให้ความเอกลักษณ์ของลาว
How would you explain Lao food? What is Lao food?
What is Lao food? ค่อนข้างจะพูดยากเนาะอาหารลาวคืออะไรอาหารลาวคืออาหารที่มีเอกลักษณ์ไม่เหมือนค่ะไม่เหมือนใครมีอาหารรสชาติอย่างส้มตำอย่างลาบที่มันรสชาติอร่อยไม่เหมือนของประเทศอื่นอาหารไทยก็จะได้ความอร่อยจากกะทิโคโคนัทมิลค์แบบนี้แต่อาหารลาวจะเป็นความหอมมาจากง่ายๆแบบนี้กับพริกหรือไม่ก็เป็นตำแจ่วมันจะเป็นอาหารที่เป็นพื้นบ้านแต่ว่ากินกับข้าวเหนียวได้ไม่รู้สึกเบื่อ
The dishes on the table at a classic Laotian restaurant showcase the flavors most essential to Lao cuisine. There's tam mak hung, or papaya salad, pounded in a mortar and pestle and seasoned with padek, fermented Mekong fish, an essential part of Laotian cuisine since before the days of the Lansang kingdom. The sausage, homemade and grilled over coals, which is perhaps the signature characteristic of Lao cooking methods, everything taking on a taste of smoke. And then there's one more thing which more than anything else is the backbone of Lao food, the foundation of the entire cuisine. I'll keep this short because we need to eat, but basically what it is just japonica, normal Chinese rice, that somehow around 2000 BC, right here along this part of the Mekong, developed some genetic mutation. The new variation had an extremely high amount of amylopectin, one of the components in starch, and that gave the rice an opaque white color and a glue-like consistency, which is why it's called glutinous rice. Contrary to popular belief, it has no gluten. Anyway, the advent of sticky rice would completely change the diet in the Mekong Basin. It became an obsession, part of local mythology and a core element in Laotian Buddhist traditions. And the entire food culture would incorporate this into every meal, with jiaos or relishes meant to be paired with sticky rice, and where in other countries texture might come from herbs or deep-fried garnishes, in Lao the crunch you find in a bite of lab probably comes from toasted sticky rice. Now, this isn't the only place where it's consumed. Since spreading from the banks of the Mekong, it's been accepted in parts of Bangladesh and Indonesia. It's used in Thailand's most iconic dessert and cooked on holidays in China, but here it's everything. The only country on Earth where it's the primary staple and where the per capita consumption, depending on the estimate, is between 177 and 256 kilograms of the stuff per year. Even at the low end, that's still more than a pound per day for every human in the country of Lao. So with our khao niao, our lab and sausage and papaya salad, and with a table covered in beer Lao, it's finally time for dinner. All right, so in the time it took for us to film our coverage for the food to be prepared, we're on beer Lao number 3. This is pretty representative of our first night in Vientiane. Every time we come here, which is to come to this restaurant to have a few beers, to order way too much food, and then to relax and slow down. Dennis and Carol are joining us as the cinematographers and directors, and since they've both been to Lao before, but first time really exploring this city, Lao PDR, People's Democratic Republic. Here in Lao, they say that the PDR stands for Please Don't Rush. So now that we've been running around, we've been getting our footage, we've been filming in the kitchen, the food's on the table, it's time for us to not rush and to slow down and actually enjoy what makes this country so enjoyable. Beer Lao, sticky rice, amazing sausage, ingredients that are endemic to the region, incredible techniques, and great food. Cheers.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Best beer food in the world.
Combination.
Over top 3.
Spicy, sour, salty.
I meant sausages, cashews, and plates of seaweed that you can snack on.
It can be hard to remember that this is an international capital city. Welcome to Vientiane, the embodiment of please don't rush, but still somehow 8 times bigger than any other town in the country of Lao. It's the kind of place where you can cruise around on a motorbike without ever hitting traffic, where if you run out of gas, you probably need to wake up the attendants at the station, and where the whole place smells like meat on a charcoal grill, set to the soundtrack of cooks making tamak hong, or pounded papaya salad. All over the world, there are restaurants serving the food of Laos' more famous neighbors, China, Thailand, and Vietnam. And yet, outside these borders, there are less than 100 Laotian restaurants anywhere. Basically statistical noise. The country of Lao is used to being overlooked. It sees only a fraction of the number of tourists that visit other parts of Southeast Asia. Its biggest airport averages 1 flight arrival per hour, and again, this is the capital. I could barely manage to get gas for my motorbike. But all of that brings up one major question when it comes to the cuisine, and that is, if this place is so anonymous, well, why did the dishes we had last night look so familiar? I mean, isn't this basically just the som tam, lab, and sticky rice found on every block from New York to Nigeria? Well, the short answer is yes, it is exactly the same thing, but with one massive caveat. And so before our next meal, we need to go back to the story and pick up where we left off, at the end of the Vientiane Rebellion, and follow the people who were removed from Lao and relocated across the border. And specifically, they were taken here, to the Korat Plateau in Thailand, better known as Isaan, or the Northeast. Now, for a long time in history, Isaan was a vital part of the Khmer Empire, from today's Cambodia. But in the 16th century, a drought hit the region that wouldn't let up for more than 100 years, and the population scattered, leaving behind a dry and desolate land that was more or less empty when it was seized by Ayutthaya after the fall of Angkor. Anyway, to Siam, the land still had value. It was a buffer between the major central cities and rival Southeast Asian kingdoms, and especially against the spread of colonialism and Christianity, with Europeans arriving en masse to the east starting in the 1700s. So the Laotians in Isaan established a population. They built settlements and served as a first line of defense, while culturally they were left alone. Siamese investment focused on Bangkok and the tin mining regions to the south. In Thai writing, Isaan was referred to as Siam's Lao provinces, with Lao language spoken, Lao culture practiced, and a rural farming population that would swell to make up almost half of Thailand's residents. It would stay that way until the 1950s, when a booming Bangkok found itself in desperate need of workers, and the government began to incentivize the Laotians from Isaan to move to the capital. It started as a trickle, and within a generation became a flood, with millions upon millions arriving and introducing their food to the Thai mainstream. They'd bring tam mak hong, which would become som tam, sweeter and adapted to the local palate. Lab, a word in Lao that just means chopped, would become simplified as a single dish, usually pork or chicken with citrus, mint, and chili. The grilled meats of the Mekong River, typically fish or pork, would in Bangkok be replaced with a more common chicken, bringing gai yang to the masses. And the vast category of jiao, or Lao sauces and relishes, would generally be represented as nam jim jiao, a variation of jiao som. In the 1970s, when tourism came to Southeast Asia, foreigners discovered the food of places like the Philippines, Vietnam, and of course Thailand. But almost no one came to Laos because there were no beaches or coastal cities. There were only a few paved roads across the entire country, and after 22 years of war, well, Laos had been devastated, bombed again more than anywhere else in the history of the world. But in Bangkok, tourists found these exciting dishes, and they'd become famous as Thai food. Now, you would think that this would cause a bit of controversy, that Lao people would be upset to see their own iconic dishes spread around the world with credit given to another country, especially the one that burned their own kingdom to the ground. But upset is not a word well suited to Lao. I mean, this is the land of please don't rush. And anyway, well, that stuff is Thai food. It's Thai Isaan. According to locals here, just a distant cousin of one small branch of this vast and diverse category of food. Som tam and lab, even in Lao form, are just the dishes presented at the major restaurants because it's familiar to us. But the real food, well, that's still a well-kept secret, available only if you know where to look. And since we're back to starting from square one, well, we might as well follow the standard rule of arriving in a new country. You go to the wet market.
มากๆเพราะว่าอาหารเรามันจะมีหลายสไตล์แต่สำหรับค่อยเฮ็ดนะค่อยมีอาหารของหลายภาคแต่เหนือฮอดใต้เลยนะดิ มักเพชรมีหอมแดงกระเทียมมีหัวสิไข่หัวข่าโอ้หลายได้ เต็มมงกุฎ
This is Noi Kyu Duang Di, our guide for the next part of our shoot. She comes here to this bi-weekly farmers market to buy ingredients for her restaurant, Doi Kanoi, which might be the most revered place serving Lao cuisine in the entire world. Chef Noi has been referenced in the New York Times, hosted groups and dignitaries from everywhere, and last year published what's been called the definitive cookbook of Lao cuisine. And today we're here at the market as her guests. To begin to understand the food of any culture, it helps to start by understanding the ingredients, the natural resources that form the foundation of a cuisine. Here in Lao, it's unique even within the region, the product of being a landlocked country with a tropical climate, with hills and mountains and of course the Mekong River, a full 1,800 kilometers of which lies within the borders of Lao. Now what that means is two things. First, because of the higher elevation and the absence of a coastline, combined with the fertile soil of the Mekong Basin, Lao, more than anywhere else in Southeast Asia, is well suited for the kind of plants that need a range of temperatures. For example, nightshades like tomatoes and eggplants. And you can find examples of those in the cooking with things like Lao Khao Soi, a noodle dish based on a sort of tomato ragu, and jiao ma kua, a pounded eggplant relish served, of course, with sticky rice. And it also means that for a landlocked country, there's a staggering variety of fish. In fact, 1,100 distinct fish species endemic to the river, with a full 1/4 found nowhere else on Earth.
อันนี้มันออกมาจากน้ำโขงเลยป่าอยู่บ้านเฮาป่าน้ำโขง
That's fresh water? That's not a saltwater
แต่
fish?
มันมีตัวใหญ่ๆอันนี้มันบ่ใหญ่
That's crazy. I had no idea that
Come
could be
on,
it.
Kid.
Yeah, crazy.
When Chef Noi opened her restaurant in 2016, she set out to showcase the diversity of Lao cuisine, to prove that it was more than somtam and sticky rice, and to help establish a national identity that can stand on its own here in Southeast Asia. But the further she dug into the topic, the more complicated it became, and there were almost no resources available to tell her the story of her own food. In the last few years, there's been a boom of construction and development linking parts of the country together, but Lao is still far behind on infrastructure. And while in much of the world finding out how to cook something just means checking Google or YouTube, well, here in Lao, only half of the country has access to the internet, and just 1 out of every 9 people has ever used a tablet or computer. So for Noi, well, she began at places like this and in markets across the country, finding new ingredients and asking questions.
ปกติเฮ็ดหยังกินล่ะพวกเจ้าแกงใส่
แกงไส้ดูก็ได้คั่วก็ได้
คั่วมุกขมแห้งว่ะ
มันคืออันนั้นก็ผมเป็นชื่นใจนะ
เงาเขานึกใจ
ค่อยบ่มัดคนค่อยยังมัดกิน
ใช่ป่ะคั่วใส่สิ้นหมูแค่คือเขาคั่วใส่ผักอื่นนี่บ่
คั่วใส่ชิ้นหมูใส่เราคั่วผัดบน
อ๋ออันนี้เป็นอาหารเผาไหนที่คั่วใส่สิ้นหมูนี่
เราสูตรมัน
อาหารมงโอเค
There are 49 ethnic groups officially recognized in Lao. According to estimates, closer to 250 in total, and all of them have their own culinary traditions based on local tastes and ingredients. There are the Kamu and the Katang, the Hmong and the Lolo and the Putai, the group of Noi's own ancestry, hill tribes and river tribes, and the people of all 7 of Khun Boram's old kingdoms, and a whole lot more, coming from empires both recent and long ago. It was only for a short time in history when all these different groups were together, part of the same unified country or kingdom. It happened under the Lansang, starting with the conquests of Fangum, and ending in 1707 when a fight for succession divided the empire into pieces. And then it happened again starting in 1975, and that's it. Until just the last 10 years, nearly all of Lao was undeveloped. Few roads were paved and entire provinces were isolated. Every region was unique and different with unique and different foods. The stuff that we all know, the so-called Lao food made popular through Thailand's Isaan, well, it is authentic, but only to the families of Vientiane at the time they left in the 1820s. It's the food of one city, one of the many ancient kingdoms in one region of a vast and diverse country. So if it's not, quote, Lao food, then what is?
อาหารลาวนี่มันถ้าเป็นอาหารลาวมันจะกว้างเลยคือเขาเห็นขายเป็นตำบักหุ่งแม่นบ่ตำบักหุ่งปิ้งไก่แกงหน่อไม้ลาบก้อยคือมันหลายกว่านั้นอาหารลาวนะคือมันจะหลายกว่านั้นเพราะว่าส่วนใหญ่ที่คนเฮ็ดอาหารคือขายทั่วไปร้านอาหารเนาะหรือที่ชาวบ้านขายน้ำริมโขงหรือน้ำอีหยังอะนะมันคือกันหมดเลยอาหารลาวนะแต่ที่จริงอาหารลาวเนาะมันหลากหลายกว่าท่านคือแต่น้อยนี่จื้อได้ตั้งแต่น้อยจนปัจจุบันนี้กินน้ำไม่ตู้มานะคือบ่ฮู้กินไปกี่พันอย่างแล้วอาหารที่จะกี่อย่างค่ะนะคือบางอย่างที่น้อยเฮ็ดอาหารอยู่ร้านน้อยคือกัน
When Doi Kanoi first opened, Chef Noi served the dishes of her own family, the cuisine of the Putai people of Khammouan province, in the heart of the rice farming basin of the central Mekong. But realizing that she couldn't rely on the internet, she started exploring farmers markets, then going even further, traveling to the farthest corners of the country, meeting locals and cooking in family homes and trying somehow to understand not just what Laotian people eat, but what it is that ties it all together, what makes something Lao.
คือการเบิดอะไรเนาะเพราะว่ามันต้องมีหม้อนึ่งข้าวเห็นบ่มีหม้อนึ่งข้าวมีเตาถ่านมีถ้าอาหารลาวน่ะต้องขาดบ่ได้แม่นอาหารที่ต้องเฮ็ดที่เตาถ่านเนาะเพราะว่าแปลว่าอาหารลาวเฮาน่ะคืออยู่ร้านค่อยเองนะทุกอย่างสลายทั้งปิ้งทั้งต้มทั้งอย่างค่อยจะใช้เตาถ่านเพราะว่ามันเป็นเอกลักษณ์ของถ้ามันเตาถ่านมันจะแซ่บกว่าเตาแก๊สนะเห็นเอาบ่ละต้องมีครกมีซากมีอีหยังเครื่องปรุงทุกอย่างแหละเครื่องมีมะเขือมีหอมบัวกระเทียมหัวสิไข่หัวข่าหัวขิงอีหยังแบบนั้นคือขาดบ่ได้เลยสำหรับภาคใต้ไทยค่อยนะแม่นปลาแดกเนาะแต่ว่าทางภาคเหนือบ่กินปลาแดกได้ลาวทุกคนส่วนคิดว่าโอ้ลาวต้องกินปลาแดกต้องกินข้าวเหนียวบ่แม่นมันแล้วแต่ภาคอันนั้นคือภาคใต้ไทยค่อยนี่กินข้าวเหนียวกินปลาแดกแต่ว่าทางภาคเหนือถ้าเพื่อนจะกินข้าวเจ้าแล้วก็กินแตะเกือน้ำป่านี่ก็น้อยสุดเลยเกือมักเพชรที่กินเน้นแท้ๆนะทางภาคเหนือแต่ว่าสมุนไพรเพิ่นปรุงบ่คือกันถ้าจะกินอาหารลาวดั้งเดิมต้องไปกินอยู่บ้านแบบว่าที่บ้านน่ะเฮ็ดกินเองแต่ที่อยู่ร้านอาหารน่ะบ่มีคือเฉพาะ ไส้อั่วนี่นะคือไส้อั่วน่ะมันคือกันเบิดแม่นบ่ไส้อั่วคือกันเบิดเลยแต่ละส่วนเผาของไส้อั่วบ่คือกันถ้าเวลาปรุงเวลารสชาติอีหยังทุกอย่างลิ้นแตนแบบนึงซ้ำเหนือแบบนึงพงศรีแบบนึงแล้วก็เสียงขวางอีกแบบนึงหลวงพระบางแบบนึงเวียงจันทน์อีกแบบนึงสไตล์นึงคือเป็นไส้อั่วคือกันแต่ว่าปรุงบ่คือกันรสชาติทางในที่ปรุงหั่นนะที่ตามที่เฮากินมาแล้วโอเคค่อยก็ได้หลายสูตรที่แบบว่าเฮาไปกินมาแล้วก็ไปเรียนรู้กับผู้เฒ่าผู้แก่ที่เฮ็ดอาหารโอเคใส่อย่างไรแม่อันนี้เผาใดอันนี้กินแนวใดอันนี้ใส่แนวใดคือเฮาอยากรู้เฮามักนะเพราะฉะนั้นเฮาก็เลยว่าอยากเปิดร้านอาหารลาวเพราะว่าตัวเองมักแล้วก็อยากเฮ็ดให้คนอื่นกินนำนะอยากให้คนอื่นกินแบบว่าอันนี้เป็นอาหารลาวถ้ามาโอเคมาอาทิตย์นี้กินอาหารนี้เนาะมาอีกอาทิตย์ต่อไปกินอาหารใหม่เพราะว่าเปลี่ยนทุกอาทิตย์แบบเป็นอันนี้มันเป็นอาหารลาวที่เขากินอยู่คือกันก็เขากินอยู่เฮือนนะได้ปะ
For Noi, the dishes she cooks at her restaurant are based on years of travel and research into the most obscure ingredients and ethnic groups. But since Doi Kanoi isn't open today, she's just making what she likes to eat. and her own personal Lao comfort food. It's a dish called Khao Soi, unrelated to the soups of the same name found in Thailand and Myanmar. Khao Soi is just a translation of cut rice, as in hand-cut noodles made from rice flour, and the Lao version is made with a stock flavored with what's basically a ragu, a sauce of tomato, garlic, and fermented soybeans. This, as much as lob or papaya salad, is a national favorite. It just never made it to Thailand because it's not from Vientiane, which means for now the rest of the world is missing out.
It's almost like a bolognese kind of flavor when it's done right, where you have the tomato and the meat. It's deceptively, unbelievably complex. And, I mean, this is worth a trip to Laos just for this. I mean, I like the confidence. She's not. Sometimes we go to a restaurant or somebody's home and they're looking at you to try and find out if you like it or how it is. And here, she's not even watching you. She knows that this is delicious. All right, guys, let's please cut the cameras and eat, and that way we're all still friends when this shoot is over. I'm not the only one that gets to enjoy this while it's hot.
Pretend like you're taking a picture out the window.
Why pretend when I can actually take a picture?
You can if you want.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at that, right?
Wow.
It's an hour drive from our hotel to our next destination. I mean, it's only 18 kilometers, but once you leave downtown, it doesn't take long before the roads turn into dusty streets through quiet farmland, and anyway, this is Lao. Please don't rush. I chose the location for our next meal at random a few days ago, scrolling through Google Maps looking for anywhere that sold traditional Lao food. I ended up finding a pin to a place out in the countryside to the north of the city, and they invited us to come up and join for a meal. So that's where we're going, but since we have some time on the way, I want to tell you why I'm here, and why we came for filming. Of all things, Daria and I found ourselves in Vientiane because of the marathon, something of an annual tradition. Now, this is what Daria does. We've been to a lot of these races, and they're all kind of the same general idea, except Vientiane. Here, well, it's something. They give you a headlamp to wear because long stretches have no lights. You need to dodge a few cars because sometimes they forget to close the roads. And the meal at the end is one lady making somtam. But they're really trying, and honestly, it's just so much fun. We come every year. The Vientiane Marathon has the distinction of being Daria's first podium finish with a giant check for 800,000 Lao Kip, or a little more than $30. And this year it was her first win. Now, it wasn't just the marathon that made us fall in love with Lao. I mean, I've been coming here since I was a young backpacker, and every time, from the food to the people to the crazy situations you always find yourself in, it's just a wonderful place. Somewhere that, like we saw with the marathon, is really trying, even if they're making it up as they go. I guess it makes sense that after so many years of war and hunger and colonization, after being bombed more than any other country, and after being overlooked while neighbors like Vietnam and Thailand become paradise destinations, Lao really wants its turn in the spotlight. It'll pull out all the stops for an event like the marathon, even if they're not quite sure how to pull it off. But I mean, for the people here, all of this is new. Lao isn't hiding. They want you to visit, and they want you to try the food because that's a big point of national pride. The real food, not just the Thai version. But how to go about that? Well, that's the problem. How do you promote a country that has no beaches or big cities or tourist attractions? And how do you promote a cuisine when nobody knows what it is? Now, I ask that rhetorically. I mean, there's no way I'd even begin to know the answer to such a big and complicated question. But sometimes when we're filming, we just get lucky, and as it happens, well, the place we're going, the restaurant I chose at random on Google Maps, well, by some crazy stroke of good fortune, it happens to be the home of one of Laos' top tourism officials, who today at least supposedly is going to cook us lunch. All right, I know what you're probably thinking. Wait a minute, in a video where you're talking about the promotion of Lao cuisine, you just happen to randomly end up at a place run by the second in command in the Lao tourism industry. Well, yes, that's exactly what happened. I know I said it before, but this is a very small country. Khun Manichan started her career of all things in mining, having studied energy exploration at university. But she found herself transitioning to a career as a travel agent, then entering government at a time when the amount of visitors to Laos started to grow, from just 14,000 in 1990 to 1 million 15 years later. But she noticed that when those tourists would come, they weren't eating Lao food, and Lao people weren't doing enough to showcase their own cuisine. So she opened a cooking school, complete with all the ceremonial trappings you'd expect in Phuket or Bali, but focused on her own traditional dishes.
เป็นทีมงานของบ้านสวนมณีจันทร์ในสถานที่นี้เป็นสถานที่เรียนรู้เกี่ยวกับการเรียนเฮ็ดอาหารลาวอาหารลาวอยู่ที่นี่ก็คือเป็นอาหารลาวที่ว่าเป็นอาหารลาวดั้งเดิมจำนวนหนึ่งแล้วก็จะเป็นอาหารที่ว่าพื้นเมืองเกี่ยวกับภาคกลางของนครหลวงเวียงจันทร์และกิจกรรมอยู่บ้านสวนของพวกเฮานี่แม่นพวกเฮาเฮ็ดอาหารเป็นหลักและหลังจากเฮ็ดอาหารหลักๆแล้วเฮาก็จะมีอาหารพวกของหวานก็คือมันจะเป็นตัวกิจกรรมย่อยขึ้นมาการที่ทำกับข้าวเนี่ยก็คือว่ามาถามว่าไผสอนที่จริงเฮาเป็นลูกชาวนาเนาะแล้วก็เป็นคนตั้งถิ่นอยู่แล้วการที่เฮ็ดกับข้าวเฮ็ดอาหารหรือทำอาหารลาวหรือว่าปรุงแต่งอาหารลาวเนี่ยมันเรียนจากบรรพบุรุษก็คืออย่างน้อยๆก็เรียนกับพ่อกับแม่เนาะเรียนด้วยครอบครัวของตัวเองแล้วก็เป็นคนลาวที่ฮักการแต่งอาหารแล้วก็มักกินอาหารลาวมักกินข้าวเหนียว
The goal of Manichan's cooking school is a little bit different than the cooking classes you might find in almost every tourist town around the world. Usually it means showing the secrets behind the dishes that are already famous and beloved, but here it's more about simply introducing the cuisine in general and explaining to visitors where they are.
คือแนวความคิดของแม่มณีจันทร์เนาะถ้าว่านักท่องเที่ยวเขามาเที่ยวลาวนะก็คืออยากให้เพิ่นได้ชิมรสชาติของคำว่าอาหารลาวแท้ๆเนาะบ่อยากให้เพิ่นคิดว่ามาลาวแล้วจะบ่มีอาหารลาวที่เป็นเอกลักษณ์คือเอกลักษณ์ของอาหารลาวอยู่ในประเทศลาวมันก็แตกต่างกันไปอยู่แต่ละภาคคือภาคใต้ก็จะเป็นอีกแบบนึงภาคเหนือจะเป็นอีกแบบนึงแต่อยู่ที่นี่นะคือมณีจันทร์สร้างขึ้นมาก็คือว่ามันบ่ได้แม่นจับเอาจุดนั้นจุดนี้มาสร้างมันสร้างจากแนวความคิดของเฮาอยากให้คนต่างชาติหรือว่าคนลาวที่ว่าเป็นวัยรุ่นยุคใหม่นะมาใส่ใจเกี่ยวกับการกินอาหารลาวแล้วก็เรื่องเฮียนหรือว่าความแนะนำนักท่องเที่ยวเวลาเฮ็ดกิจกรรมขึ้นมานักท่องเที่ยวรู้สึกว่าอาหารลาวเนาะกินข้าวใส่กระโปรงมะพร้าวใส่ภาชนะที่เป็นอันใดที่มันเป็นไม้ไผ่อย่างจังซี่เขาก็รู้สึกว่าดีใจแล้ว
แต่อาหารลาวโดยรวมเนี่ยมันเป็นยังไงบ้างครับ
แต่หลักๆอาหารลาวโดยรวมก็คือนึ่งมาเนี่ยถ้าว่าเป็นอาหารลาวแท้ๆเนาะต้องมีรสชาติคือพอปานกลางก็คือต้องใส่พวกอาหารลาวแท้ๆเนาะบางเมนูที่เฮาเฮ็ดอยู่ในนี่นะก็คือต้องคนลาวต้องกินปลาแดกกินบักเผ็ดแล้วก็กินข้าวเหนียวและอาหารลาวแท้ๆที่ว่านั้นน่ะต้องมีพวกปลาคืออาหารที่เฮามาเฮ็ดอยู่บ้านสวนมณีจันทร์นี่ก็คือเฮาเอาป่นปลาดุกขึ้นมาเพราะว่าป่นปลาดุกนี่เป็นเอกลักษณ์ของคนท้องถิ่นที่ชาวทงเนาะกินอาหารต้องมีป่นปลามีแกงแล้วก็จะมีปิ้งปลามีออกปลาแล้วก็มีแก้วมีลวกผักอาหารลาวแท้ๆนี่ก็จะเป็นพวกประเภทนี้ถ้าเป็นคั่วหรือว่าเป็นผัด หรือว่าจะเป็นพวกที่มีน้ำจิ้มหรือว่าเป็นแบบที่ว่าวัยรุ่นกินทุกมื้อนี่นะกะว่าเป็นอาหารลาวบ่ก็จะมีส่วนหนึ่งที่คนยุคนี้กินเนาะแบบว่าเขาเจ้าปรับไปตามยุคแต่ถ้าลาวดั้งเดิมแท้ๆนะต้องเป็นคนต้องกินปลาแดกกินข้าวเหนียวรสชาติต้องเผ็ดแล้วก็รู้สึกว่าอันใดก็ต้องอยู่ในผักเข้าพานึงน่ะต้องมีผักมีแจ่วแล้วก็จะมีปลาแล้วก็จะมีแกงประมาณนี้ป่นปลาดุกนาอาหารลาวจะเป็นทางภาคกลางภาคเหนือภาคใต้คนลาวต้องกินป่นปลาดุกซีซิกให้เราเบิ่งจ้ะ
Interesting to see people trying to present Lao food in a way that's more, you know, how you would typically expect to see Thai or Vietnamese or something else, right? You know, if Lao is going to attract those kinds of tourists, the more upmarket travelers, and have them actually eat Lao food, it needs to look something like this.
It's still very simple, though.
Pork is delicious. You can taste the pandan. Nice place, beautiful atmosphere.
I like it. No accounting?
We're trying to convince our driver to come eat with us. He's sitting in the car having a bag of chips. And all three of us, in turn, you, me, and now Carol, have just one by one gone out to the car to try and convince him to come and eat with us. Dennis is next.
I know we've talked a lot about the speed of Lao, the whole thing about the Lao PDR, and you've seen it in this video, as we're like 45 minutes in and this is only our third restaurant. That for us is not how we usually film or travel, but the more time you spend here, the more you start to realize that the lack of a hurry is very much by design. It's not laziness, it's a conscious choice, because when you slow down, you connect with people in a way that would be unthinkable in almost any other city. I get that it might sound crazy, but this is how it always is, with or without the camera. Cooking with the owner's grandma, or coming with a chef to shop at a market, or sharing a meal with the driver, because why not? It's Lao. By the time we got back to Vientiane, the sun was starting to set, and while all of our training said to pack in one more restaurant, to keep filming and maximize every second, well, that would have been dishonest. Because here, well, things move slow, and all you really need is a cold beer and a view of the Mekong River. In the 3 days we've been filming in Vientiane, we've covered a lot of ground, from history to culture to the local dishes and ingredients. We've examined the traditions that trace back to the Lansang Kingdom and explored the regional diversity across the country of Lao. But there's one part of the story that we haven't yet discussed, and for that, well, let's go back one more time to the 19th century. Except this time, instead of talking about the Lao people who moved to Isaan, we need to talk about the ones who stayed behind. It was 1893 when France took control of the old Lansang Kingdom and set to work rebuilding Vientiane. And for the next 62 years, well, Lao would be a French colony. Now, when it comes to food across their Asian holdings, the French have a complicated legacy. They had a rule, which was that their specialties were only for themselves. Their subjects were not to eat French cuisine, nor were the French supposed to dine on colonial dishes. In fact, they had a saying which was, bread and meat make us strong, fish and rice keep them weak. But that doesn't mean the French wouldn't make an impact on Lao culinary culture. You see, to make their food for themselves, they had to build a lot of infrastructure. Flour mills and dairy farms, breweries and coffee plantations. And when the French left, well, those were abandoned and taken over by locals. The end result was that starting in the 1950s, people here started playing around with new ingredients, taking the old forbidden techniques of the French and recreating them, adjusting for local tastes, and the end result was a new branch of Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Lao cuisine. As for what you might find here, well, there are things like the Khao pate, a Lao version of the more famous banh mi, but just as epic, stuffed with pate, Lao-style sausage, grilled pork, and fresh herbs and seasoned with some Laotian jiao bong. And the classic Vientiane breakfast of fried eggs, baguette, and local meatballs in a pork broth, created in Vietnam under French occupation and brought to Vientiane in the years when this was all one colony, French Indochina, just one more layer in the complicated and delicious history of the country of Lao. We came to Vientiane to try to answer the question of what is Lao food. Well, that's not true. We came here for the marathon, but you know what I mean. Anyway, after 3 days and a few really good meals, after a trip to the market and a drive to the countryside and conversations with whoever we met, I guess we kind of have an answer? I mean, it's pounded salads, lab, and sticky rice. It's noodle soups and grilled meats, the flavor of smoke and 1,000 kinds of sausage, but it's also the history of 240 different ethnic groups, a unique landscape surrounding the Mekong River, fascinating dishes and incredible stories that are still secrets, undiscovered and unchanged, because this is the country that doesn't rush, the Lao PDR. Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon. It really helps to keep us going. Follow the links below for our Patreon and social media, and we'll see you soon.
บ้านนอกที่อยู่ที่บ้านนอกก็คือถ้ากินอาหารมีอย่างอยู่ตามไร่ทำนาเนาะตามท้องไร่ทำนาคือถ้าจะกินนี่อย่างก็ถ้าจะกินปลาก็ไปตึกปลาถ้าจะกินปูก็ไปจับปูแบบนั้นอยู่บ้านนอกนะที่มากที่สุดก็คือถ้าจะกินอะไรอย่างก็กินไก่นะพ่อบอกว่าพ่อจะกินต้มไก่พ่อบอกว่าโอเคถ้าจะกินต้มไก่ก็คือจับไก่มาฆ่าเองตอนนั้นน้อยประมาณอายุยังบ่ฮอด10 ปีแต่พอให้น้อยฆ่าไก่เองก็บอกว่าโอเคถ้าจะกินก็ไปจับมาฆ่าเองก็บอกว่าฆ่าจริงได้ฆ่าไก่ พ่อบอกว่าโอเคถ้าจะกินก็ไปจับมาฆ่าเองกินอันนั้นเป็นที่ครั้งแรกของค่อยที่พ่อบอกว่าอยากกินต้มไก่แล้วก็ไปจับไก่มาฆ่าเองก็คือเมื่อก่อนคนเองทุกอย่าง